Hello, good now to you. Welcome to, what is this show called? Riffing with Ryan. That's me. Oh, Riffing with Ryan. Who's Ryan? Ryan is me, Ryan Erickson. And I am here with a person who is recommended to be interviewed by a friend, Kyle Griffin Aretae. Thank you, Kyle, for what I think is going to be a fantastic episode. Gentleman named Ron Darnell, PhD. And we're going to talk a bit about his educational journey and all. Well, we're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about. And if it's interesting to you, well, that's cool. And I hope it is. So I will spare no waste of time and bring Ron to the stage. Hello, Ron.
Hello there. How are you, Ryan?
Well, I am curious and hoping, well, I just think like I said, I think we're going to have a great time here. Before we get into the three questions that are not what you do yesterday, what are you, blah, blah, the Scrum questions. What is your relationship to this domain of Agile software development? And if you take a minute or so before our question, then we'll say that.
Well, my current relationship, I would call myself a scholar practitioner, consultant kind of thing. But over the years, I was fortunate enough, I suppose, to be kind of in the software business or technology business back when it was all called lightweight methods. And I was on the sidelines while the Agile movement was taking off, and, was a Scrum Master. I actually won a job for my first real Agile job was working with Craig Larman, and they were busy working on the beginnings of what became LESS at the time, and doing consulting work. And I've worked on a lot of Agile projects, lots of regular projects over the years, it's going all the way back to the 70s. I started out writing, actually learning Fortran and COBOL and all of that in college. And then when I got out and got a job, I wound up going to work for AT&T at the time, as Western Electric, and found myself working in a lot of Unix and C and all of that. So, and that led to other things, opportunities, automating engineering workflows and a lot of that kind of work. So that's how I got here.
And so there's a lot of history, and certainly if folks want to connect with you and have additional conversations about that, I'm assuming you would be open to that. Find you on LinkedIn.
Sure.
And open to that. And you teach at the university. We didn't even talk about, what university do you teach at currently?
I'm teach at Amberton University, amberton.edu, if anybody's interested. And I teach primarily in the business management programs, but we have an MBA in project management, which for the most part has been the traditional kind of predictive model that we follow. But with the PMBOK 7, they kind of expanded that view. And so now we're taking into account the adaptive and other methods. And then we have an Agile project management, some Master of Science in Agile project management. And I wrote both of those programs and got them through the bureaucracy to get approved and everything. So they're kind of close to my heart. And we have about, it's a very small school. Probably have maybe 100 students a year that graduate from the program. And the project management program, we've had a certificate since like 2001 or something like that, but the degree since 2010 for the MBA, and then the Master of Science, when we got that going about 2017.
So you teach at undergrad and graduate level courses, project management and adaptive software development that has come to be known as the A word that happened in 2001. Well, it's time for the question. So what's an Agile coach?
Well, that's a question an answer that I think is today, what is an Agile coach? It's really somebody that focuses on sort of an indirect approach, allowing people to kind of explore what they're doing and get better at what they're doing, increase their performance at what they're doing. And so it's a non-directive kind of thing, should be. But they also it kind of overlaps with what a consultant is. And to me, a consultant provides solutions. And so what I've seen a lot in some of the recent clients I've had, one of the things about my university that's nice is they encourage us to work in the field instead of having a requirement to do lots of papers and stuff like that, which is nice. It allows us to bring practical experience into the classroom. But so what I've seen in the last few contracts I've worked on is a lot of the coaches behave more like consultants. And I think that's one of the problems that we have right now is that Agile, at least what they call transformations, Agile is kind of a technology. And it's, if you apply sort of the technology adoption to it, we're probably late in that adoption life cycle. And the clients that are wanting to do transformations now are going to be much more conservative and much more critical of it than maybe early clients would be. And those clients that have been on the path for a while are going to be more mature, and they don't need a solution. They need a coach that's going to come in and help them improve their performance. And, they don't, because the solution's already there. And I think a lot of the coaches that I've worked with sometimes have a little trouble figuring out which environment they're in. So that's my definition of what an Agile coach maybe should be.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, right? So that brings in a very interesting question. So that's what an Agile coach is today. That's what's happening in the field, and that I think I like how you bring in the adoption curve, because the folks who got on this bandwagon back in 2005, 2006, or whatever, are a couple generations through Agile transformation, and
they're going to be the early adopters. What you would call early adopters in the technology, right?
So, and that the folks who are now asking for Agile transformation are the businesses, are of a totally different character and class, and they want something different. They're asking agility in software development practice to do something else for them that the early adopters may not have been.
Yeah, the late adopters. Sometimes we call them, in some technologies, they'll say laggards. They're the ones that are kind of.
A little.
I don't want to use words like that.
A little judgmental, maybe.
But you think about the iPhone. When it first came out, it didn't do much, really. It took pictures, and you could do stuff with the screen and make phone calls and stuff like that. And there were people who adopted, bought those iPhones at that time were the people who would be willing to deal with a little bit of inconvenience, right? Yeah. And work through the process. And I think the same thing goes with adopting Agile early on, and those companies got a lot of success out of it. One, because they were more open to making that transition, and as the curve has gone up, it becomes less and less people are less tolerant of dealing with making that transition.
Yeah. Well, SAFe, I think it's an intentional branding. SAFe is called SAFe because it implies that, hey, it's safe when you do this, because there are all these the pictures and the choo-choo trains that we talk about, that I'm comfortable to know that this is, and there's it rhymes with the structure that's in place, the hierarchical structure, and then the management system. And SAFe doesn't make any claims that I'm aware of loosening that system necessarily.
No, they actually promote what they call the dual operating system, which you maintain the hierarchy. So, because the hierarchy gives you that, that structure that, that keeps the lights on, efficiency, all of that, and the business got there and it needs to preserve itself. The bureaucracy of an organization is a lot about self-preservation. It wants to preserve the organization and keep it going and continue to fulfill whatever mission they have. But SAFe basically promotes this dual operating thing where you build a value stream by pulling people out, and you create this network, this value stream. And the idea is that it can be more adaptive and more like the older version of the company, maybe when it was a smaller entrepreneurial company. And so when they go in, when as an executive going in and looking at that, they're going to say, well, okay, that's cool. I get to keep my job. And I can do these other, because one of the biggest questions years ago, a friend of mine had a podcast, and he did a guy that used to be not Anderson, but another guy that used to be with the Kanban Academy and something like that. And he had spent a lot of time in Japan and other places. And one of the things he found is go to put it in, the first thing a lot of these middle managers and people ask is, what happens to my job? Because the way Agile was promoted early on is, hey, you got to reorganize. And so SAFe comes along. Dean Leffenwell, IBM, he published a book called Agile Requirements in like 2009 that kind of lays all of this out, the beginnings of what SAFe is all about. And Craig Larman and them they came out with their was it Scrum at Scale, Scaling, Large Scale Scrum, their book, in about 2010. And then I think Discipline Agile was somewhere around 2008 or 9. But SAFe was the one that really picked up the traction. And if you look at any of the studies, at least the last State of the Agile report I saw, it's about 50 to 60% of all, formal scaling adoptions are SAFe now,
Yeah. And are unsafe at any speed. And from even if you're on LinkedIn for just a few minutes, you see the bashing of that, you go back and forth, and that it's not really agile, and what makes it agile, and that word in and of itself, everyone, like, you have a definition of it, I might have a definition of it. The folks who I talk to, everyone has their own definition of it. And if it's not what's stated in the Bible, what came off of Mount Snowbird, then what is it? It's whatever you call it, right?
Well, people say it's a mindset and all that. And I had a chance to have Dave Thomas, one of the signers, come to be a guest lecturer at one of my classes. And it was fun to hang around with him and talk about how all that worked out. And coming away from that conversation, I kind of got the impression, it just kind of stuck with me. The 4 values are really the mindset function. If you're going to be a coach, you need to embody those 4 values to be legit, for your client and those employees, the people you're working with, to be able to kind of respect you. You need to exemplify that, personify that mindset. Doesn't mean they have to. You hope that someday they come along, but doesn't mean they have to. And then the principles are really what guide your decision making. They're not like edicts, it has to be this way. But if you're going to do something, does it violate one of those principles? And if it does, do we understand the implications of that? And do we want to do it anyway? And so then there's that trade-off situation that you have to do, because maybe your culture just, like self-organizing teams is a real popular. Maybe your culture just doesn't do self-organizing teams.
And what does that mean anyway in the context? I think this goes also a couple places right into the meat of the theme of your dissertation, which was about implicit. And I don't want to state too much about the topic of coordination is there, and what was the research question, and how does that play into the principles?
Well, just a little background about how I got interested in that. When I first went to college a long time ago, I wanted to be. I signed up as an accounting major of all things, and one of the courses we had to take was economics class, right? And I got an economics class, and I thought, man, this is pretty cool. This kind of explains how people do things. People with their own interest, pursuing their own interest, put together markets and do things like that. And that's kind of stuck with me. And so when I started working on what topic do I want to do for my dissertation, one of the things you have to do when you do a dissertation, you kind of have to pass the, so what and who cares test. And I wanted to study Agile practices, how the effectiveness of Agile practices. And my mentor, my advisor, was like, well, who cares? And so I was like, well, okay, how do I structure that? And I read an article by a paper by a woman out of New Zealand. Her name is Diane Strode. And she has developed a whole theory about Agile coordination and Agile projects. And so that led me down the coordination path. And since then, I've kind of viewed pretty much all of these things that we do to work, whether it's traditional project management, adaptive agile, whatever you can call it, all the flavors under that, the large scale frameworks, even some of the, hold on a second.
Oh, yep, sure.
I'm on the call. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. Hey,
just,
we're live, folks. Stuff's going to happen.
Hang on a minute. Someone just opened my door. So, but anyway, so that led me down there. And so I kind of look at,
you can take a moment if you want.
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right.
And I kind of look at things from that perspective. And so I view all of these things as as technologies, as coordination technologies. So I see Agile as a coordination technology, and coordination in the sense that if you're going to try to do anything, if you're going to accomplish any goal that's beyond what you can do personally, requires some type of coordination with others. Okay. And so there's different types of coordination, obviously, classifications of it. And there's essentially implicit coordination, explicit coordination, and there's something called stochastic coordination. And that's the kind of coordination that like bugs do, to build nests and, insects and sort of things like that. And it's also the kind of coordination we do, like when we purchase a lawnmower, we know how to use that lawnmower, but we're actually kind of without meeting the people that built that lawnmower, we're kind of coordinating with them to accomplish mowing the yard. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we agree with what this thing is for and what it does, and and you can get it. Yeah.
And from a technical software development, like code perspective, I think that's what most software developers really want to strive to, so that the code is written in such a way that it's kind of maintainable without them having to actually interact with who built it, eventually, simplicity and all of that. But then there's explicit coordination. Explicit coordination in terms of what I studied in Agile. What I did is I put together a study that studied people that were doing projects at the time. This would have been, I would have started doing my work about 2011 or so. Kind of the scaling stuff wasn't really a thing at the time. It was real nascent, real new. So I conducted a survey, and explicit coordination is really, there's like 3 dimensions of it based on Diane Stroud's work, in that you have the right thing at the right place at the right time. Okay. So it's like, okay, you have a dependency that you have to have, and it needs to be there at the right place. It needs to be the right thing, whatever it was we defined, and it needs to be delivered at the right time so that I can continue my work. And then we also have explicit coordination that happens when we have like a stand-up meeting is an explicit type of coordination. A planning meeting is an explicit type of coordination. All of these, quote, ceremonies that we have, or events, I think we kind of gotten away from the word ceremony now, but events are all kind of explicit things. But they have a purpose. They have a purpose of helping for the explicit part of it to emerge. And that was always one of the big selling points of Agile, is that we have this explicit kind of thing that happens. I think, who's the crystal clear guy?
Alistair
Coburn. He talks about osmotic communication when people are co-located and things like that. So the explicit part of it is that it's kind of, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know what's going on around me and when it's happening. I know what I need to do and when I need to do it. And I know I know who's doing what, especially on a small team. You can do that. It gets a little more complicated the bigger we get. And who knows what, who knows, who can I go to like for an expert or something like that. So those are all the explicit things. And what I found was that both of these things are significant when it comes to predicting success of this time. Mine was a project. I wasn't looking at products, but I would assume the same can be inferred to products. But that both have to be, you have to have effectiveness in both areas, both explicit and explicit. But what I was surprised to find out, at least my study, and I haven't replicated it. If there's anybody out there that would like to replicate it, let me know. But it is that the explicit part of it had a higher level of significance in predicting project success, which really kind of surprised me, because all of the kind of selling of Agile,
the dogma, maybe, yeah,
we're going to get together and just kind of develop this hive mind and be real productive and happy and all that. And it's true to some extent, but I was surprised to see that the explicit stuff was more important.
And that comes down again to the principles of self-organizing teams. We talked about that. There's the specific language around that the best architectures and designs come from self-organized teams, right? So, okay, well, all right, well, why is that? What do you mean by self-organization? Who's doing the organizing? Who's making the decisions? All those things are not even they're alluded to in that statement, but there's no specification or what does that mean? It doesn't mean everyone's down there, flipping dice about, whatever decision has to happen. And also, I think this comes into the explicit and implicit bit too. The next piece is that, well, co-location. The best thing to do is face-to-face communication, right? It's the best the way to do. So that implies a value judgment about if you're not doing face-to-face communication, well, you're not doing Agile and you're not going to get the results. You found something different in your research.
Right. Right. Well, I found that face-to-face communication didn't seem to make it, as far as a predictor of success, wasn't statistically significant. That's all I can say. I don't know. In other words, I was able to not reject the whole null hypothesis, if you want to put it that way. So, but I can tell you from my practical experience is that it's been a long, long time since I've worked on a consulting assignment, coaching, or, coding, anything where we were co-located. And, it's probably been 15 years, because it's even early on when I was like in the early 2000s, I was working for Texas Instruments at the time. We were doing the calculators, and we had people all over the globe. I mean, it just didn't, and the communication, I mean, we're doing this face-to-face thing now, which in some respects is even more intimate than people sitting across in a cubicle.
Very much so. The intimacy that you get here is, I think can be so much deeper. Right. And I think when NAFTA happened in the 90s, that's when the outsourcing and offshoring and all this kind of stuff happened. And then, which is interesting that was happening around that time, before the lightweight folks decided, at Uppsala and all that stuff, to get together and talk about Agile. But people were offshoring. There were distributed teams in the early 2000s, and how could that have been missed in terms of making a statement about, you got to do this face to face? So,
well, a lot of what emerged with the Agile Manifesto, it was just kind of the zenith, I guess, of this movement that started way back. Even you can go back to the 80s and really and look at, I think the first paper that talked about Scrum as something other than a rugby game was for manufacturing automobiles in Japan back in 1988. And that's, Swiber and Sutherland based their work on that paper.
The new product development game that everyone looks at as the
1995. Yeah. Then you started seeing the emergence of like RAD and spiral methodologies, and what I was involved in the software development area back then. And I've never worked on like mainframe stuff. I was came in, other than sort of big switching frame, telephone switches and things like that. But most of my development experience has been on like smaller Unix machines, 3B machines, or on PCs. And, you talk about pair programming. We didn't call it that. But when we first started getting PCs to do software development on, they were about $20,000, and that was like in 1982 money. Yeah. And so what they would do is they would buy one and stick it in a cubicle area, and we'd all sit around and share it.
She had no choice, right?
Yeah. And so, but it's like, you learn a lot from each other from that. And I'm a big fan of pair programming, but, but so we were kind of doing this work with small teams. So I've had unfortunately, I guess I've never really got locked into that big, long 18-month cycle of getting things done. But what we started seeing is with the advent of more personal computing, all of a sudden the people who are using your software could actually interface with it. Then you started seeing more demand of what we could do. And as the technology, we went from PCs, then we went to more bigger machines, and we went to, the first LAN we put in with a token ring, and now we moved to Ethernet. That made it easier to connect. And then more and more, the technology, the users, the developers all got more integrated. And so the frustration that everybody was feeling was this disconnect, the disconnect to be a good way to put it, between what was happening. And it created quite a bit of, it was tough. It was a tough period because you work really hard on something, you show it to, your client gets it and then they don't like it, and and it's probably the first time that they've seen it because you spent, which we solved that problem with doing demos and things like that and getting it in. And I really think what's happening now, I've noticed that a lot of my friends, if I look at their LinkedIn, they have their open to work label on.
that's going to be for the next part of the program, because I'm going to go into that.
Okay, sure. But we're seeing maybe the kind of the end of that part of it, and the technologies like this tend to go in these 20 to 30 year cycles. If you think about the predictive methodologies, and it was fun to be around Craig Lerman at the time. All this was kind of emerging. He had this whole presentation he did that made the analogy that old stuff was like bloodletting was to modern medicine. I don't think it's quite like that, but it was a very impactful presentation. It was fun to see people's reaction when he gave it. But anyway, so I think maybe we're on the cusp. This is Agile. It's been around, if you think mid 90s to like now it's 20, 30 years. Maybe we're kind of starting to look at the next, whatever the next paradigm shift's going to be, because Agile truly represented a paradigm shift in how software was developed. It was a true paradigm shift.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll do this to signal myself when I edit that this is the next part of our conversation. So the way this goes, I think we talked about it. So if there were a safe place to have a dangerous conversation that you can't really have in public, reputational risk and all that stuff, in this domain, the community that is not a community, the Agile software development community that is not a community, what would be the dangerous conversation with reputational risk that isn't happening or has never happened in your mind?
Well, I think probably it'd be a good time to ask, does what we're doing really add to the bottom line? Is it worth the return? Are we getting a return on investment on our, what it costs to, do safe or be agile or whatever it is? Is it this really improve overall success? Because like when I did my study, the chaos report would come out every year or so, and they would say that traditional methods, so like 24% of projects succeeded, all 76% of them failed in some way. In the last report I saw with the emergence of Agile, this would have been 2013 or 14, is that the success rates went up by like 15%, which if you look at the overall spend on software development in projects at the time, you're talking about in the billions, possibly trillions of dollars. 15% is a big chunk of change. Okay, we've been doing this now since 2013, another 10, 11 years. Is that margin of success still there, or is it diminishing? And I think maybe what I'm reading, at least, I don't know if it's just out of frustration or what, but I'm reading a lot that maybe it's not. Maybe we're starting to see some decline in the overall success rates. Which that to me would be I don't think people ask that question. At least I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah.
And we just assume that we're going to,
Agile's the way,
and we're going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that underlying assumption true?
Yeah. And how do you, now that's the research, and again, what is success and what is not. So I'm going to do this thing again. I'm going to say, all right, Ryan, it's time to edit. Those of you who are out there who don't want to be there, see you later. Now, Ron and I are going to riff for as long as we want. So the question that came up, again, talking about that, what the research that you did in 2015, and it's been 10 years since then.
Right.
And in that time, what is the question? Is this question the same? I mean, we talked about the dangerous conversation there, but does this really matter anymore? But in terms of coordination and that, have you seen things change? Is the question different now?
Well, I think from a coordination, the reason I like framing it as a technology, a coordination technology, is because coordination is kind of a fundamental thing we do. And so, and from there, you can kind of extrapolate into, it gives you some way, a framework to compare things. And so I think that sort of what's changed, I think, is that we're moving at the same time. I'm having trouble kind of putting this together, but at the same time, society is going through these things. And so Agile kind of represented a sort of a postmodern approach to work. In other words, the old ways were more predictive because we were kind of forced to objectify our outcomes, right? So in other words, we had to put software on a disk and ship it to someone, or we had to put it on a tape and fly somewhere. And so it pretty better work when you get it in the disk, or when you burn it onto the chip for the calculator or things like. And we still have that in some areas, but for on the internet, CI/CD, all that's kind of changed that. It's reduced the risk of that effort. So, it was much more risky to deliver something you hadn't planned for because you didn't have a chance for any feedback. If you did the feedback, your product was in the market and
you were already manufacturing stuff. You had stuff getting put into the boxes and all this. And then if you find a critical bug late in the testing oops, then and that's, I think maybe this is part of it, that software development at that point, you could really use a manufacturing metaphor for it.
Because in some ways it was a physical product with a software component, right? Well, the underlying technologies evolved to the point where now we can ship stuff online. Even that's risky, but you can roll it back and fix it, and a good, the CrowdStrike thing recently is a good example of what can go bad. But with some of the newer stuff,
they rolled it back, and then it wasn't like a week; it was a day.
Yeah, it's still expensive though, in the billions of dollars, I'm sure. Because we had flights that couldn't go and all that, and then now we've, now I don't know when I've installed something using a CD or a disk or anything since then. So the technologies have made it more possible for us to not have to objectify. We can kind of let what we do evolve, right? So now, and so we have a more collectivist kind of postmodern view of things. And the problem with those types of philosophies, if you will, is they tend to deprecate the individual contribution. And so I'm thinking what I'm seeing in terms of coordination is that we're all human critters, right? And we have egos and we want to be recognized. And Agile has some of that built in, but as you scale it up, it becomes less and less of a factor. And so I think some of what we're seeing now is people becoming frustrated with the fact they get lost in this. I did a contract with Verizon a while back. We had, I don't know, I think we had 6 or 7 value streams, and each value stream we were doing safe, and each value stream had, 6 or 7 solution trains. Excuse me. We had 8 solution trains.
8 solution trains.
Yeah.
Ooh.
In the area, in our particular area, we were doing the 5G deployment. I think we had 6 or 7 release trains into that one
solution train.
Yeah. And so you're talking 1,200 people. And it's easy for kind of the individual to get lost in all of that. And so I think from a coordination perspective, then you're kind of losing some of the implicit stuff, like knowing what's going on and who's doing what. And you become more of it almost starts to feel like a return of the kind of the Taylorism scientific method, in that respect. And I think there's a danger in overscaling doing that.
And that's, it's the decentralization versus centralization thought. And that, and also this is the other topic I think that comes into that in terms of coordination. If decentralization is, I guess this is hello everybody, my philosophy about decentralization is that decentralized small teams are the way to coordinated decentralized small teams are really a way to manage that in the best way for that type of organization that handles it. And also there are some input criteria to an effective self-organized team. And I would say that there's a level of cross-functionality, knowing that and there's complementary roles, that there's a small team that you can have that kind of bonding like you had. I don't know if we were recording, we talked about being in the room with somebody, but now we can be in a room and be together. And so that's a different way of being. And that's a different coordination problem. And how do we make sense of that in terms of a management theory? What's a manager to do when the people who know what needs to happen are facing the customer, and the people who have the tools to do that are facing the customer, if those cross-functional requirements for self-organizing teams are present? So it's, and you mentioned the reason I go into that is because it's Taylor, right? Taylor was the modern kind of management, the industrial age management, and then Mary Parker Follett is kind of the other side of that. This idea that it's not power over, it's power with, and to have power with, there's all sorts of other things that need to happen for power with to work. And I think now is the time to consider that power with relationship as more effective for dealing with software problems and dealing with the world around us. I'm wondering what your take is on that from an organizational management perspective.
Well, I think we're seeing that the kind of the negative press, if you will, that some of the like regular management type activities like planning and personnel and direct, that kind of stuff, there's no place for that in Agile. But I think what we're seeing now is that we're realizing that there is a place for some of that, maybe not to an extreme, but there's some value in maybe doing a little more planning than just kind of sitting down and writing up features and user stories. And, it can be in terms of more detailed roadmaps or whatever, but I think some of that with us sort of thing now, because somebody has to pay the bills, and we got to work together to make sure that happens. We got to deliver good products, and sometimes I think the technical aspect of it dominates. Sort of, I read years ago.
I'm losing your audio a bit. Are you?
Maybe I backed up a little bit. How about that? Am I here? Hello.
Yes, you're here.
Okay. I don't know what happened there. Well, there's I'm trying to think where I was at. This my son bought me Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I don't know. Have you ever read that book?
I'm familiar. Actually, I haven't read it, but I kind of get it.
Parsig. Well, anyway, he's talking about, he's kind of writing this in the kind of the late 70s time frame, and it's a philosophy book. But he kind of goes into this dichotomy that happens between sort of the romantic aspects of like quality and the more technical aspects of quality and how there's two perspectives of it. And really what we need to do is bring those together. And I think that's where the us comes from, that, there's the people that really like the technical quality. And I think maybe some of the emphasis has been over the years more on the technical aspects, because that's been what's, kind of driving it. But now our customers are getting much more sophisticated than they used to be. So that romantic quality of what is this widget going to do for me? I don't care what this thing does. Does it work when I get it?
And
I don't care what it took to make it.
Does it allow me to do what I want to do in order to become who I need to become? The transcendental philosophical question.
So we need people around that champion that part of the deal.
And this is the other side of the conversations that have been. This no such thing as an agile coach, because no one really wants agile, or the people who you're delivering software for doesn't really want agile. And that the coaching part of it, if the coach is a professional coach without work domain knowledge or any kind of awareness of technical expertise, and that they're solely about the quality that is the quality, which is ephemeral, and this is heart-based, spirit-based, and is not, this stuff has to meet spec because it has to work. It's both and. But there are many in the coaching domain who have lost the plot. That integration isn't quite there. It's like the technical stuff is for the techies. I'm all about the touchy-feely stuff. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. Just
it
kind
takes
of like
both.
understanding the integration. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes both. So, that's kind of my philosophy, and has always been with all of this coaching or whatever your role is. If you're going to be involved in something like this, you need to have a good sense of interpersonal skills, because if you're going to be an indirect, it's, they talk about servant leadership, and there's all kinds of words, but basically it's just being kind of with good intent, the right thing, respect for people and all of that. And if you go down the Agile Manifesto, I kind of made some notes here, but if you look at the theme that's in the principles, it's like on value delivery, customer focus, adaptability, collaboration, communication, outcome focus, quality, efficiency, self-organization. So it's all these kind of aspirational things. And if you're coaching, you need to have a good kind of understanding of how teams perform or how organizations perform in those areas. If your role is to improve performance, if the Dallas Cowboys down the street, they don't hire coaches to implement football. They hire coaches to improve player performance and win games.
Skill coaches, position coaches, offensive and defensive coordinators, the offensive line coach, and all strength coaches, all those different kinds. And that's technique, and that's so. I think we talked about it before, but not here. There's practice that you got, and you need to exercise those skills. You go to the weight room, practice your running, do your own to be a high performing individual. And then when the coordination game happens around this competition, I got to win this game. You have to have had individual, group practice, and all this kind of stuff.
And you need to give your teams room to practice. And that's been part of the issue that I've had a few times, is that they're under such a grind. There's the product management people, they see any hour that's not utilized as an opportunity to put some work on somebody's queue, right? And you need to allow the teams. That's some of the methodologies. SAFe has that 1 week, inspect and adapt thing going, which is great if they do it right. But what I found is, in practice, most of the teams are busy trying to catch up with the overload that they had before, so they can meet their objectives they had. And I've been in a couple of places where they did really do hackathons, and I thought the overall technical ability improved overall, and the morale was better, which I think leads to, if you can get the morale correct, that helps everything else be better.
The better implicit coordination happens, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And and one thing you mentioned earlier that I had not heard the stochastic coordination before, and I've heard things like stigmergy and this kind of the natural self-organization that happens. How much of that stochastic coordination did you observe in your studies, and is that something that might be interesting going forward?
Well, I didn't really look at that specifically. I came across it mostly in the reading that I did, and some things I talked about, and most of it has to. Most of the time they're talking about it in terms of like natural sciences, like organisms, like ants. They lay down pheromones, but the original kind of sort of search for food is real random. But once they find it, they can kind of lay this thing, and they all coordinate, and they can build a nest, and they all know their role. And they don't, they don't have 3-pound brains to do it. They just do it. And so you kind of stretch that back to how humans work, and it happens all the time. In like if we buy an object for a purpose, like you buy you put in a Java IDE, Eclipse or something like that. Well, you're coordinating in a stochastic kind of way. You don't have any direct connection with the people that built that software, but you're using the functionality and stuff that they provided. And so same way, I think another way to think about it is like if you have a commercial kitchen, and when the night shift leaves, if they put all the utensils and pots and pans all back in the same place where they're supposed to be, then when you come in the morning, you kind of know that right place, right time, right thing sort of stuff. And then
it's in the freezer, where your place is, you do your mise en place and all that, and what the menu is, and that kind of when all those the input criteria are there, then you can perform to a quality standard of excellence, and then at the same time feels like, oh, now if I'm at this quality standard of excellence, it's meeting the spec of I put all the right ingredients in the right place at the right time, then delivering that gift to a diner in a beautiful place, then you kind of marry the two together.
Yeah, and you can kind of make that analogy with building products, software products, and we have I think there's probably still COBOL code out there that was written back when I was around, and I don't know if it's there because it's just nobody knows about it, but you write code today, I have a friend, a young man I used to work with. He's one of these, graduated high school and college when he was like 18, really smart. And he wrote some code. He was with I can't think of what company he was with, but he spent a lot of time with Google. But he has code that's actually on the Mars lander, the robot thing that he wrote. And so it has to be that's in that stochastic kind of state, right? It needs to be kind of a point where it's bulletproof, right? And it's excellent. And I think that's kind of I don't like to use words like holy grail, but it's kind of the thing that you want is, at least when I was a software engineer, I wanted to write code so that if the next person came along, they didn't have to rebuild it to understand what it did. They didn't have to go through line by line. And because back when we first started writing this stuff, if you upgraded memory on one of these telephone switches I worked on, pretty much all of the software that ran on it had to be rewritten because it was so tightly coupled. And so we wrote like really cryptic. It was hard to understand. You had to really know what you were doing to get it. And as the tools changed, you could talk in more of a more verbose style. But then we went overboard with that.
Yeah, I mean, were you writing like assembly at that point, or like machine language, or
C language? The old Kernighan and Ritchie C that they gave us some training and gave us a little book that had their name on it. It says Kernighan and Ritchie. That's probably a collector's item now. It was like 32 pages. That's all of the manual that we had with it. And so the thing was, you wanted to maximize a lot of times you were only dealing with, at least on the PC side, we were only dealing with like 8K of memory. So you didn't want to use it all up with characters.
Or your Atari cartridge that was 4K when you're programming it.
So you had to be real efficient with what you're doing. And the compilers got better and over time, and they handle a lot of that efficiency for you, and it allows you to write more code that's more readable and shareable, that kind of thing.
Understandable.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done any like serious coding, but like in 2000, I got a solution developer certificate on for Microsoft on Visual Studio 6.0, and then a year later they came out. Then a year later they came out with .NET, and I got a thing in the mail that said, "Hey, you want to upgrade to .NET? It's only going to cost you $400 and something," and I was like, never mind.
Well, and it's like the cache factory that Scaled Agile has. Every year you've got your point releases of the knowledge that really hasn't changed that much.
No.
So that leads me to a different question about, in your role as a teacher and someone who's kind of caring for the generations of young folk that come through and enter into this market, what kind of advice are you giving them around, where should their skill sets be to engage effectively in the workplace?
Well, for the Agile stuff, we really focus on the manifesto. The curriculum is kind of designed after the PMI ACP, the Agile Certified Professional. And the reason we kind of did that is, one, the accreditors and people like that like it when you have a professional certificate, one that's fairly rigorous to kind of guide you. I won't say we're like really stuck with it, but the reason we pick that as a model to follow is that it covers all of Agile pretty much. It's not really focused on any one particular framework or one particular methodology. And it covers all the basic stuff. And so that's what we do is I want students, because a lot of the students don't have the opportunity yet to get experience. So, and some of them do. You'd be surprised. I have a lot of most of our students are what we call adult students, are like 38 or so. It's the kind of the median age level. And so they're coming in to improve their knowledge and skills. But we cover everything because we want them to have a good broad base, because you never know where they're going to land. They may land over in an organization that's doing, maybe they're doing the Spotify model, or maybe they're just doing Scrum, or maybe they're just doing Kanban, or maybe they're doing some kind of combination of all of it, like SAFe does. And so we want them to have at least a fairly broad and reasonably deep knowledge in kind of the entire domain. And so we have, like, the first course is just a basic Agile project management course. I think if I had to do it today, if we were going to write today, I would project/product. I'd put the product in there, because we didn't really develop products back in the day, and we developed software, but they weren't productized like they are today. And then we have the Agile methods, where we talk about I kind of separate Scrum, Kanban, all of those kind of lighter weight frameworks, if you will, methods. We call those methods. And then we have a course in scaling, which is the big. We cover everything in that. We cover, I talk about discipline Agile, I talk about LESS, I talk about SAFe, and also we cover a lot of, there's like 14 different scaling frameworks these days. And then we have a capstone course where we actually go through we use the Jim Highsmith, because it was the envision, speculate, adapt model and they go through and actually simulate the best we can, being remote and everything, a actual life cycle that they might go through, applying Agile models and things like that. And so, again, that's kind of our teaching methodology. And they get, we try to do as much hands-on, if you will. We're not all in the same classroom, so it's hard to do that remotely. But I want them to get it familiar with the kind of who's who in the industry. Like who the signers were, and who did XP, who did Kanban, and all of that.
a holistic historical perspective, and here's what the topics and themes are of the day in terms of practice, which is
yeah. And then we finish it up with what do they think is going to happen in the future? So it's an assignment it's a written assignment that they do some research on and look at the state of where we are, maybe look at some of the predictions that people are making and come up with their own conclusion of what they think might happen.
Wow. Oof, 2 more questions. One is, so again, as a role as an educator, talking about how you prepare young folks who are just learning about this. There's another cadre of folks, your peers and my peers, and folks who've been laid off and are like, what do I do now? Is Agile the thing? Do I stay with this? Do I not? What do you say to the folks who are looking for work now, and as a couple possibilities for where they might go to get employed?
Well, that's a tough question right now. I think what we're seeing a little bit of is companies are looking to see they looked at what Elon Musk did with Twitter X, and he was able to reduce 60% of the workforce, and still, they're putting out new functionality. I don't think they're reaching profitability yet, but they're still operating. I think what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are looking around and going, well, shoot, they can do that. We can do that. Yeah. I don't know of any other explanation for it. So I would kind of advise students to, if they're looking for work, find an industry or at least something that they are passionate about, and people use that word passion over and over and over, but I like to define it as, what is it that you're willing to do? It almost, was it Einstein said that, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is insanity. Well, I also kind of think doing the same thing over and over and failing at it and keep continuing to do it over and over is your passion. That's what you're passionate about. If you want to, you keep trying, and I'm just like, find an industry a product, an area that you're interested in, and just keep going back at it. And eventually, if you're willing to sludge through some failures and use that as experience, you might get in an organization and it just might not be a good fit. Chalk it up to learning and move on. It's a tough question because I haven't really been myself in the consulting game for a while. I took on a role for the university to work on assessment, on academic assessment, and we had a person that left left the university, and they had a role that needed to be filled. I don't know how long I'm going to do it, but I'd like to get back in the field, consulting.
To getting some practical,
Yeah, but I still get probably daily. I get several emails a day from recruiters that I've worked with in the past and ask me what I'm doing and am I interested. So there's jobs out there. It's just I think I wouldn't spend time in an industry that I wasn't interested in doing right now.
Didn't care about.
I wouldn't get a job just for a job's sake, because I still think there's enough of them out there for that. But that's kind of the only advice I can give them. And also give them, if you want to get a lot of times the question is, well, I got to have experience to get a job. And I'm like, volunteer somewhere, if you belong to a club or an organization and they're going to do an event, or they're going to do something, volunteer and manage that, put that on your resume as experience.
Yeah. And this is something I want to do. I don't mind if I get paid 60% of what I did, but I enjoy it. So last question, kind of totally off. It's in the book domain. Is there a book that you want to read? Maybe your next book you want to buy, or what are you reading now, or whichever? What is the book that's most on your mind?
Well, right now I'm reading this book. It's called Understanding Instructionally Useful Assessment. But that's not really what I want to read.
Great plot, huh? Yeah. What do you want for your birthday? What's the book that you want for your birthday? How about that?
I haven't thought about that in a while, because I've been so kind of caught up in trying to ramp up on the statistics part of it. I mean, not statistic, but assessment part of it, which has a statistical component. It's time for me to reread the Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I read that a couple of times, once every so many years. There is one thing that it's a thing that's been back in the 70s that it's called. Have you ever heard of the Abilene paradox?
Yes.
Yeah, and I was at Texas Tech, and Dr. Harvey that came up with that. He came out to speak at our class, and he went through the whole thing. And at the end, it's the paradox of agreement. Basically, everybody makes the group takes action that's contrary to anything they all agree to. And the reason they do that is because they have these fantasies about what might happen if they disagree. And so, and the problem is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you fear happens anyway. So maybe it's fear of being exercised from the group or something like that. And so anyway, he came at the end of it. He says, I don't really discuss this in my literature or anything, but I had the antidote to this is to the paradox is grace. And I was like, I just kind of sit back in my chair and went, well, wow. It's basically accepting people unconditionally. You don't have to put up with BS, and people have to be the right intention, but it's basically being righteous with people and loving them or accepting them for who they are and treat them that way. And it made a huge impact on how I approach everything. And so I've always tried to approach that with my teams. I try to coach people to do that. And so there's a couple of journal articles out there. It's like the Abilene Paradox 40 years later. And I'd like to revisit that, I think, a little bit. I've got the book here. It's just a little small book, but it made a huge impact on me. And then I had another opportunity that kind of made an impact on me as a coach is I had a chance to do some consulting work at Bridgewater Associates, which is a Ray Dalio's. I always pronounce it wrong. But this was back, I want to say 2010, something like that. It was with a company called Valtech. And we had a contract with them they were building software where they could to sell their clients. And anyway, I went up on site there in their office, and it's this whole principle-based management. I don't know if you've read his book. That'd be a good one. Yeah. Now he's got like 300 of them in there now. It's crazy. But at the time I was there, it was a small amount. But it was really interesting being in that place, watching these people. Part of their mandate is that you challenge. Doesn't matter what level somebody is. If you think your idea has legs, you challenge them, and you have this conflict. This Abilene paradox type of conflict. In other words, you're all both in this as individuals who respect each other's positions. His idea is that the best solutions would emerge from that kind of dialogue. And at the time I was there, they may still be, but they were the largest hedge fund in the world at the time. And I don't recall, but I think I might have got a chance to meet him. I think they had us all out in a big bullpen area, and he used to come out, and we were kind of in a fishbowl. They had all these offices around the outside. All the technical people were in a fishbowl, and he used to come around and talk to people. But that's another thing that that I learned, that these principles, like the Agile Manifesto principles, are guidelines for decision making. And if you look at them that way.
Yeah. And the first four, absolutely, and then each of the 12 there. If you have to choose between individuals and interactions, relationship, or technical tools or something like that, the manifesto says, do this more, do more of and that's just if a coach embodies that and knows those principles and can adapt them to whatever situation they're in and guide folks to improve. Sounds like
and I extend it to my students, the same kind of approach to this, and so far it's worked out well. I've got students who I encourage them all to connect with me on LinkedIn. I get to keep track of their careers and things like that, and then most of them all doing real well. So
yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. I would love to do this again.
Sure.
How would you like folks to interact with you and connect with you, find out what you're doing?
Well, the best way to connect with me is visit my LinkedIn profile. It's R. Darnell, LinkedIn, whatever. Just type Ron Darnell and I'll come up. And and send me an email or message me through then. I'd love to. One of the things that we didn't really talk about is I kind of have this idea for being one of the problems you have with a lot of these frameworks is, are they really effective? And that goes back to my question, my dangerous question. And I think if you take some of the concepts from the coordination theory, how effective are we in these 8 domains? Who knows what? Instead of, did we have stand-ups? Is your team doing stand-ups?
Is our transformation successful? Yeah, if we've trained all of our teams, and if you're doing all these things, then you're successful, and I can lead.
And you couple that with what I'm learning in the academic assessment world, it'd be great to maybe have a way to actually go out and take this and see if you can actually measure the effectiveness of a framework using that coordination approach. And do a study.
Connecting theory to practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And do a rigorous study on it.
A dissertation, maybe.
Yeah, well, or at least an article. If somebody's working on a dissertation, needs help with something, wants to use my work, that'd be great.
And by the way, your dissertation is on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah,
it's 142 pages, and it's fascinating stuff, and it's a great way to.
And you'll see a few little typos in there still. And I paid a professional editor, and it goes to show you that no matter how closely you look at something, something will squeak through, right? So nothing's ever perfect. And
well, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping other people do it. Voila,
but I'd like to try to see if we could. What I would like to come up with is a way that you could take, say, Spotify model and SAFe and compare their effectiveness, but their effectiveness as a framework, and using coordination theory to do that. And I'd love to work with somebody on that. It's the kind of research you can't do on your own, and
And
I think if I had somebody pushing me, I'd do it.
Yeah, I think the software, you would hope that story to be told would be one that, if it's if the hypothesis is true that implementation of a framework helps a disorganized, chaotic organization to develop valuable and successful projects and products, well, even though case studies are kind of all right, well, everyone's situation is different, but having some evidence that a framework could possibly be useful be definitely.
Well, and a lot of the assessment, a lot of the assessment stuff, tools and things that are out there, and I don't want to criticize too many, but they're more focused on practice. Are we doing this, or how late are we? How effectively are we meeting our story point estimates? And it's not that stuff's not valuable, but it doesn't really test the effectiveness of the entire framework. And then a lot of what you read that are like white papers, you have to be suspicious of all of that stuff, because if it's written by somebody that's in the game, it's going to be biased.
Who's funding the research?
And not to say that I'm not going to. Every study is biased in some ways. I mean, we all bring it with us, but at least.
But if you're upfront about your biases, this is me. This is but this is what I found. There, I think you said there's such a thing as data that is observable. It does exist, and what is the data, and what is it telling us? So, All right, Ron, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go eat something.
Yeah, it's
And
1:30, 1:10 where you are, so it's
it
late.
is 1:10, and you're in Central Time Zone,
Yeah, I'm in
right?
Central Time Zone. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn on the music just to give us a signal of something to people here. Sorry, people. I'm going to say, see you later on. I'm sure
It's
this
great,
is
and if you want to do another one of these, let me know. So,
absolutely. Everybody, thank you so much for the precious gift of your time and attention. Check out Ron's profile. I'm stoked. I'm going to listen to this again very soon. So be well, be more purple. Take care.